Released on Brunswick Records, May 1957, Cricket's remake of That'll Be the Day. The song title came from its repeated use by John Wayne in the film The Searchers. Originally, the song was written by Holly and his drummer J.I. Allison, but now Petty's name appeared as a composer on the record label. J.I. Allison.
That'll Be the Day in particular, we were practicing my folks' house. They had a big bedroom with a prop piano in it. We didn't see that movie, you heard all that John Wayne movie. And basically we ought to write a song. I said, that'll be the day.
The Decca version of That'll Be the Day only credited Holly and Allison as writers. The young pair, aware of Petty's experience as a recording artist, discussed the situation.
We wrote it in, it wasn't one word or maybe a different key is all that changed, but he said, I'll put my name on this voice. You know, when it comes out, because he had the Norman Petty tribute, which has been somewhat successful. It'll get more discharge if I put my name on it. He said, but that won't be the way the money's split at all. We weren't that concerned with the money at the time. We were having a great time, but I didn't want his name on there because it made it look uncool to my folks.
Strangely enough, I was not aware of the fact that That'll Be the Day had been recorded prior to Buddy doing it in Clovis. It didn't surprise Buddy that he had a hit because he expected a hit. It was really a marvelous attitude that he had. It was more or less a fact that he knew he was going to have a hit. It just depended on who was going to discover it.
Norman, being the type of person he was very suave, very to the point and frank. Now, Norman Petty kept a Bible on the corner of his desk and had help from the church for getting the money to build his studio.
Buddy and the Crickets respected Norman. Now offers were coming into Petty's office for the Crickets to tour extensively, and the group could not contain their excitement. Crickets guitarist Nicky Sullivan again.
We honestly asked Norman Petty to be our manager. He did not want to manage the group. He wanted his studio. He didn't want to manage a bunch of kids, even though they had a hit record and it would have meant money to him. He didn't want to be involved in that. And we begged him, please just be our manager. And he agreed to do it. And he agreed that he would take 10% of our earnings, but that we would have to donate 40% of our first record royalties, being That'll Be the Day, to the churches of our choice. So in essence, we were tithing 10%, and that would be a graceful gesture, thanking God for the blessing that he had placed before us.
Norman Petty was religious on the face of it, but he didn't have a moral religious attitude to everything.
Buddy Holly author and expert John Beecher.
When they signed contracts, they will put their hands on the Bible afterwards and ask for God's approval. But the point is, they were religious as well. They were brought up in Baptist families, so they were ready to tithe some of their income, as Norman wanted them to do, for the church. Whether that income actually reached their church rather than his church, we don't know.
He was very sincere about it, and we were sincere about it. We readily agreed to it. That's fine. Let's just do that, because we signed the contracts blank. We didn't care. We were happy, and we knew we were going to someday go to New York.
Buddy Holly's second major record, Peggy Sue, released in September 1957. Once again, Petty wrongly credited himself as co-writer of the song. 10 years older than Buddy and the Crickets, Petty was quietly cultivating a parental air in the way he organised his young group.
In fear of him almost, in their keenness to please him in a way that you'd want to please your father. The Crickets probably saw him as something of a father figure because of the way he presented himself. I mean, he said on the bottom of some cable, he signed himself Papa Norman. And you don't do that unless you want to encourage that.
But the Crickets were touring extensively with other successful rock and roll acts of the time, like Chuck Berry, the Everly Brothers and the Drifters. Away from Norman, they were learning some business facts of life about the music industry.
About this time, when you're on the road, because other people talk to you, say, hey, y'all have a question on your songs, and did Norman Petty really write that? Or, other people's managers and guys that were more older and more experienced. We've met a lot of people, like the Everly Brothers. They're saying, what's this? You guys don't know how much money you're making? So we got to start questioning things like, what's the deal here? Anyway, got back, and Buddy said, Norm said, I'm kind of wondering here. Buddy said, I've never seen or heard anything about our publishing company. Norm said, well, it sort of started out that way, but there's so many hits and now you guys can't afford to buy in. So it was our songs.
I've been criticized for a lot of things about not contributing this, or maybe I did contribute here or there. But I really believe, in fairness to all of us, it would be difficult in retrospect to say, well, I wrote this part, he wrote that part, because the entire scene at that time was of cooperativeness and people adding their own ideas.
That would be the day we rented his studio with our friends and told him when we were through, and as with a lot of songs. And I got to say, Norman Petty had a lot to do with Peggy Sue and the recording of it. Buddy and I wrote the song, and if you notice, Buddy's name's on Peggy Sue. I mean, it is now, but it wasn't at the time, you know.
Norman went from being paternal to power of attorney over the Crickets. It means that you can sign a document as Buddy Holly, as Jerry Allison, as Joby Morgan. So the temptation that was there to decide who'd written certain songs was immense. I mean, put yourself on there, because the other guys that are going to co-sign the contract are going to be your signature as well. Back in those days, it probably wasn't legal for someone who had power of attorney to act against the person he had the power of attorney in, but it was done.
It doesn't sound very businesslike or very ethical, you might say. So I'm probably to be criticized for being a poor record keeper, but I really do not feel that logistics are necessarily important as the thing that's been created.
But his name started to appear on almost all of our songs, and when we signed those contracts, we honestly did not know what we were signing. We gave up a lot of royalty, almost half of every song. When you see Norman Petty's name on these songs, half of those song royalties went to Norman. Plus, he was able to get all of the publishing.
The interesting thing about the royalties is that if you take That'll Be the Day, which was a song Buddy and J.I. wrote, if that song earns $1,000, so Norman gets 500 plus 166, which makes $666. And J.I. and Buddy get 166 each, and they wrote the song.
I'm not saying that in this essence that Norman Petty was a crook. I think Norman Petty was a very shrewd businessman. After all, he had spent a lot of time and effort with us, donated that time, never charged us any money. He fed us for a number of months. So Norman Petty had some due coming. But I think when it's all said and done, a lot of money should have remained with the actual writers of the songs.
As Buddy and the Crickets contested ownership of their songs, the group also had to accept significant changes Petty made to their recordings.
People that heard the record heard the dubbed-in voices, which were really dubbed in later on after Buddy left the studio. The vocals that people more or less associated as being the Crickets really were two different groups. We had a group called the Roses, and we had some other boys that were called the Picks. They were Pickering brothers. Now, Jerry Allison and Joe Malden, that were credited with being the Crickets, were actually never the vocal backup to Buddy.
The Picks overdubs and later on the Roses were generally done without the knowledge or approval of the Crickets. But Norman was trying to recreate what had been done previously. That'll Be the Day had vocal backings on it. Therefore, he felt that every Crickets record should have some vocal backing. So the Picks were brought in to overdub, we'll say, on Oh Boy, which really is a pretty complete record as it is. Why put vocal backings on? The Crickets weren't the vocal group, plainly. So, in Norman's view, you had to create a vocal group sound. Brought in these guys, they weren't rock and rollers, they were very straight barbershop type singers, and put those vocal backings on there. It's a bone of contention with the Crickets and a lot of people that those voices were put on in a way that gave them prominence, whereas with Oh Boy, the vocal backing voices leap out of the background and become a major part of the record.
The vocally enhanced Crickets recording of Oh Boy, which would go on to be another major international hit record. In the opening months of 1958, Buddy Holly and the Crickets continued to tour and work hard, but their frustration with Norman Petty's management grew as record sales declined and promotional opportunities were missed. J.I. Allison again.
We had offers to do movies back in the 50s, like those Alan Freed movies. We were good friends with Alan Freed and his manager, Jack Hook. But Norman would say, no, I don't, because he didn't like that kind of movies. We wanted that. I mean, let's face it, everybody's got an ego. He didn't believe in that kind of stuff. But it's the kind of movies that Eddie Cochran and those guys were in, and Jimmy Boy and Buddy Knox were in some of them. I still hate that we weren't, because we were invited, you know. But Norman said, no, those are not classy enough movies for my guy.
Yeah, the Crickets wanted to be film stars, but Norman wouldn't have seen it that way. He'd have